The day Clint Eastwood changed everything. Sophie's fight for life. It was just another bustling afternoon on a busy city sidewalk. The rhythm of hurried footsteps, the distant sound of car horns, and the chatter of pedestrians filled the air. Among the sea of strangers, one man walked unnoticed, his weathered face hidden beneath the shadow of his hat. He was just another face in the crowd until he stopped, his sharp eyes settling on an art stand nestled between a coffee shop and a newsstand. It wasn't just the paintings that caught his attention, but the girl behind him. Sophie Carter was young, too young to be fighting for her life. But there she stood, her frail hands gripping the edge of the table, her brown eyes filled with determination. The sign beside her display read, "Selling art to save my life. Help me fight cancer." People walked past without a second glance. Some slowed down, reading the sign with mild curiosity before moving on. Others simply ignored her, but Clint Eastwood, the Hollywood legend, did something no one else did. He stopped, and in that moment, everything changed. Sophie's fight began. Long before that day, Sophie's journey started not on that sidewalk, but in a sterile white hospital room. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above as she sat on the crinkled paper sheet of the examination table. The air smelled of antiseptic and something else, something she could never quite describe, a scent that felt like fear. Dr. Patel sat across from her, his usual reassuring expression clouded with concern. Sophie's mother sat beside her, clutching a crumpled tissue in her hand. "The treatment is working," the doctor said, his voice gentle yet firm. "But we need to continue the chemotherapy. Stopping now isn't an option." Sophie exhaled, bracing for what came next. "The cost," her mother began, but her voice broke before she could finish. They all knew the reality. The hospital bills were already drowning them. Their savings? Gone. Their home at risk. Their hope fading. That night, Sophie lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She couldn't let her parents lose everything trying to save her. There had to be another way. And that's when it hit her. Art. She had loved painting since she was a child, and if there was one thing she had, it was a brush, some paints, and a determination stronger than her disease. She would sell her art. She would fight for her life with her own two hands. The struggles of an artist on the street. The next morning, Sophie set up her art stand on the city sidewalk with her mother's help. She arranged her best paintings. Vibrant landscapes, delicate portraits, and abstract pieces full of emotion. Then, she waited. Hours passed. Pedestrians strolled by, barely sparing her a glance. Some stopped, read her sign, and moved on. Others avoided eye contact altogether. A woman in a crisp blazer admired one of Sophie's pieces, fingers lingering over the frame, but after a moment, she sighed and walked away. Businessman in a tailored suit read her sign, frowned slightly, then disappeared into the crowd. One elderly couple finally stopped. They examined the paintings carefully before selecting one, a peaceful depiction of a lighthouse standing tall against a stormy sea. $80, the woman said with a kind smile as she handed Sophie the cash. It wasn't much, but it was a start. But not everyone was kind. A man in a leather jacket sneered as he passed by. "Nobody buys real art anymore," he muttered, shaking his head. Sophie swallowed the sting of his words and held her head high. She wasn't giving up. The moment Clint Eastwood stepped in, it was late afternoon when Clint Eastwood approached. He was dressed simply. Dark jeans, a button-up shirt, and his signature squint, like he was peering into the very soul of the city. He didn't say anything at first. He just studied the paintings with the quiet intensity of a man who had seen the world and all its struggles. Sophie, unaware of who he was, straightened nervously. "Can I help you, sir?" Clint looked at her, then at the sign. His gaze softened. "These are yours?" he asked. She nodded. "They're good, real good." Sophie smiled, but there was exhaustion behind it. "Thank you. I'm selling them to help pay for my chemotherapy." Clint's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. "How much for all of them?" Sophie blinked. "All of them?" He nodded. She hesitated. "Sir, that's over $3,000. Clint didn't flinch. "I'll take them." Tears welled in Sophie's eyes as he handed her a stack of bills. It wasn't charity, it was respect. And then as casually as he had arrived, he turned to leave. But before he did, he said something that Sophie would never forget. "Keep painting. The world needs artists like you." A story that touched million news of what happened spread fast. Someone had filmed the moment, and within hours the internet exploded with praise for Clint Eastwood's generosity and Sophie's determination. People from all over the country reached out. Donations poured in. A local gallery offered to showcase Sophie's work. An art school even offered her a scholarship for when she got better. And best of all, Sophie's mother received a phone call from the hospital. An anonymous donor had covered the remaining cost of Sophie's treatment. Tears streamed down her face as she hugged her daughter. Sophie wasn't just fighting anymore, she was winning. A new chapter. Months later, after grueling treatments and endless hospital visits, Sophie was declared cancer-free. Her body was weak, but her spirit stronger than ever. She continued to paint, not to survive, but to inspire. Her story wasn't just about cancer. It was about resilience, hope, and the kindness of a stranger who believed in her dreams. And somewhere in Hollywood, Clint Eastwood probably never realized just how much of a difference he had made. But Sophie did, and she would never forget the power of one moment. Single moment can change everything. For Sophie, it was the day Clint Eastwood stopped and saw her. For Clint, maybe it was just another day. But for Sophie, it was the day she learned that the world, even in its toughest moments, still had room for kindness. So the next time you see someone struggling, stop, because you never know. You might just change a life. The day Clint Eastwood changed Sophie's life. Forever Sophie Carter sat behind her small folding table, her paintings carefully arranged in neat rows, the colors vibrant against the dull gray of the sidewalk. The city was alive with movement, people rushing past, car horns blaring, street performers playing soft melodies in the distance. But in her little corner, under the blistering summer sun, time felt frozen. She had been sitting here for 4 days now, 4 long, exhausting days in the heat. The sun had drained her energy, but she refused to give up. She had only sold 3 paintings, and with each unsold canvas, the weight on her shoulders grew heavier. The medical bills were piling up. The chemotherapy sessions were taking a toll, not just on her body, but on her family's finances. She had started this journey with hope, but now doubt whispered in the back of her mind. What if this wasn't enough? What if she couldn't raise the money she needed? And then something unexpected happened, a story that needed to be told. That afternoon, as Sophie sat staring at the bustling city around her, a young woman with a camera stopped at her stand. She introduced herself as Emma Rodriguez, a journalist who ran an independent art blog. "I've never seen anything quite like your work," Emma said, snapping pictures of Sophie's paintings. She looked at the handwritten sign explaining Sophie's reason for selling them. Her expression shifted, curiosity turning into something deeper. "Would you mind if I wrote about you?" she asked. Sophie hesitated. She had never been in the spotlight before, but she knew that if her story reached more people, maybe, just maybe, it could make a difference. She nodded. Emma asked questions, taking notes, capturing photos of Sophie's art and the resilience in her eyes. Before she left, she promised, "I'll make sure people hear your story." Sophie didn't expect much, but by the next morning, everything changed. A wave of kindness, Emma's article spread like wildfire. The story of the young artist battling cancer, fighting for her life through her paintings, touched thousands of hearts. More people started coming to Sophie's stand. Some bought paintings, some just stopped to offer words of encouragement, and some simply wanted to shake her hand, to tell her that she wasn't alone. Sophie watched in awe as strangers became supporters, as her small art stand became a symbol of resilience. Her phone started buzzing with messages from people wanting to buy her work. Orders began pouring in from places she had never even heard of. For the first time in months, hope felt real. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. A stranger in a cowboy hat. It was late afternoon when a tall man in a cowboy hat stopped in front of Sophie's stand. He stood there for a long moment, examining her paintings carefully. His fingers traced over a black and white canvas, a breathtaking depiction of a desert scene with a lone cowboy, his silhouette fading into the horizon. Sophie watched as the man's expression changed. His eyes filled with something she couldn't quite read. She didn't recognize him at first. "What's your story?" he finally asked, his voice deep but warm. She told him everything. The cancer, the treatments, the overwhelming bills. the reason she was here, selling art on the sidewalk. Instead of resting at home, the man listened quietly. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pity her. He just listened. And then, without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a checkbook. Sophie's eyes widened as he scribbled something down and tore off the check. When she looked at it, her heart nearly stopped. $50,000, not the $200 she had asked for. Not even $1,000, $50,000. Her hands trembled as she looked up. "Sir, I can't accept this." But the man smiled, shaking his head. "You can, and you will." This isn't charity," he added, nodding toward the painting he had admired. "I just think it's a damn good piece of art." And that was when Sophie finally recognized him. Clint Eastwood, a moment that changed everything. People around them began to whisper excitedly as they realized who was standing at Sophie's stand. Phones came out, cameras flashed. Within minutes, a crowd had formed. The news spread like lightning. Clint Eastwood had just bought art from a young cancer patient. Sophie's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Journalists called. News stations wanted to feature her. Orders for her paintings skyrocketed overnight. But more importantly, she had enough money to cover all of her medical bills. She wasn't just fighting anymore. She was winning. A letter from a legend. A month later, Sophie sat in the hospital waiting for her final chemotherapy session. The last one. Her battle was coming to an end. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe in a future. She had no idea that another surprise was waiting for her. That morning, as she was preparing for treatment, a nurse walked in, holding a small envelope. It had no return address, but when Sophie opened it, her breath caught in her throat. It was a letter from Clint Eastwood. It was simple, but powerful. "Sophie, your story matters. Keep telling it through your art. The world needs it. Clint." Tears filled Sophie's eyes. She traced the words with her fingers, letting them sink in. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about purpose. She would keep painting, not just to make money, but to inspire others. A legacy of kindness. Months later, Sophie's journey had come full circle. She stood in a bright art gallery, her work displayed on pristine white walls. People from all over had come to see her paintings. Her story had reached beyond just one city. It had touched the world, and in Clint Eastwood's private collection, in a quiet room somewhere in California, hung the very painting that started it all. A black and white desert, a lone cowboy on the horizon, a reminder that sometimes the biggest changes in life come from the smallest moments of kindness. A message to you. This story isn't just about Sophie, it's about the power of a single act of kindness. It's about believing in someone's dreams. Maybe today you can be someone's Clint Eastwood. Maybe today you can stop, listen, and change your life.